I was, chased by the paparazzi, and they trapped me in a revolving door.
Oh my gosh.
In a hotel.
I just shut down. I become so used to being publicly shamed in different ways.
Everything was so focused on Harvey Weinstein, and I wanted to say, no, it's not just Harvey Weinstein. It's a lot of people in a lot of different businesses.
My experience had been so weird of going to bed one night and then waking up and, I'm all of a sudden a public person. Hi guys, it's Monica. In today's episode, I spoke with my soulful friend, Molly Ringwald. We met back in 1999 through a mutual friend who just happened to be the inspiration for one of the most iconic characters of the 80s, Ducky from Pretty in Pink. You may know her from her other work too, The Breakfast Club, 16 Candles, or more recently, Ryan Murphy's Feud, Capote versus the Swans. And while I've known Molly for 25 years, I had never actually talked to her about being catapulted into fame at such a young age. And so as someone who became well-known overnight unintentionally, I was interested to talk to Molly about how she navigated becoming a superstar after acting in a string of coming-of-age films. Anyway, I hope you find something to connect to in our conversation, and thanks for joining us on Reclaiming. Thank you to our presenting sponsor, Audible. Visit audible.com/reclaiming to find your next listen. Thank you to our sponsor, Reformation. Visit reformation.com to see why they're my go-to for stylish and sustainable fashion. Thank you so much for doing this. Welcome to Reclaiming.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Oh, thanks, Molly. It's funny because I was thinking about how on the way over that we were doing this in New York and how if we were in LA, I would have worn my Molly shoes because I don't think you know that every time I see you, I copy some outfit thing that you have some aspect. And I bought these red heeled espadrilles a few years ago because I remembered you wearing heeled espadrilles with jeans and a cute top somewhere. And I was like, that's so cute. It looks so cute. And I've only worn the shoes once though.
I had no idea. Were they not comfortable?
No, they are. I think there's sort of, those items that you put them on and you're like, yeah, not today.
Yeah.
So it's sort of that.
I have many of those that just stay in my closet and I can't get rid of them because I think they're fantastic, but every time I put them on, not today.
Yeah, and especially that I find that happens a lot with vintage pieces, and I know you have a lot of vintage stuff. So, I didn't know it at the time, but it turns out that when I was 5, I saw you in Annie.
No way.
It was seared in my mind because it was actually the first time I went to a proper theater to see a musical or play.
Who took you?
My mom.
Oh.
My mom. And so my dad took me to see the movie version, which were you also in the movie?
I was not.
Okay. So
no, I had already aged out by then.
aged out of being a young person. But and so it was, it was interesting because that was seared in my mind. And then a few years later, I remembered, seeing you on Facts of Life. And then when 16 Candles came out, it was, it's the girl from Facts of Life, and I know you weren't always on, but you had such a presence and you had it from such a young age and sort of, I felt like you brought this sense of depth, like you just exemplified someone who was a layered person and had a lot of depth. And so I made that connection and then, of course, watched all the John Hughes films 6 bajillion times. Mm-hmm. So in many ways, I felt kind of like I grew up with you.
Mm-hmm. Well, you did.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone of our generation did.
Yeah.
And even generations beyond, because those movies that I did are such touchstones, know. And there hasn't been a lot of, I haven't really seen a lot of projects that have managed to say what those movies said in the way that they said them yet. There was Freaks and Geeks, which I think was great. And, I don't know, but there's just something about those movies that just sort of have spoken to generations and everybody that, that's going through that in high school. Kids are going to still be bullied and they're still going to feel out of place. And, and those movies just kind of, particularly The Breakfast Club, even though they're flawed, which I've written extensively about.
Yeah, written very well.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's interesting because we then met in 1999 through, I guess it was like through
Greg
Matt,
Anderson.
Which it turns out Ducky was sort of based. Is that true?
That is true. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was
amazing.
based on Matt because Matt's been my best friend since I was, I think, 10 years old, since my family moved from Sacramento to Los Angeles.
Okay.
And he was one of my, I was still an Annie when we became friends. And then when I went to high school, or junior high, actually, or middle school, but we called it junior high, I was in the 7th grade and Matt was in the 9th grade. And that's really sort of when we became friends and went steady, although Matt is and has always been gay, but he wasn't out at that time. So
your best dressed boyfriend.
Yes. But yeah, so which is one of the reasons why I always say that Ducky's gay, because he was based on Matt. Matt came to visit me while I was filming The Breakfast Club, and John Hughes had taken us, he would always take us, kids, me, Anthony Michael Hall, and to Kingston Mines, which is an old, which I think is still there, to see Junior Wells, these great blues performers. Anyway, there was this band, and they were playing Roll Over Beethoven, and it was this, and I was dancing with Matt, but it was this extended version that went on for 20 minutes, and Matt kept saying, like, can we stop? And I was like, no. It was like a pride thing. We had to dance all the way through. And then based on the interaction of me and Matt on the dance floor, that's what made John write Pretty in Pink.
Oh my gosh.
And that character, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And he also wrote 16 Candles based on, is it like just seeing your headshot?
He wrote that just based on a headshot. He had moved agencies, briefly from CAA to ICM, which I believe is one agent. I mean, they combine now. But at the time, they were very, separate. And and as a new client, they gave him headshots of all their clients, and I was at ICM after my first movie, which was Tempest. And over 4th of July weekend, he put that up on his bulletin board above his computer station, and because he was a early adopter computer, and he wrote this movie. And so when it came time to cast it, and they said, who do you want? He said the girl that I wrote this about. And so we met, and and
that's an extraordinary story.
Yeah. It's pretty wild.
And did you know that at the time, like going into the film, were you aware of that, of just sort of the impact that you had on someone as a muse, like to be that young, and you inspired this entire film?
I guess, he did tell me the story when we first met. I met him, originally he had written The Breakfast Club, and then he wrote 16 Candles after. In fact, he was in the middle of casting The Breakfast Club locally in Chicago with local Chicago actors. In fact, John Cusack was going to play John Bender, and Joan Cusack was going to play Allison. And I don't know who the other people that were cast. And then he wrote 16 Candles and then gave it to the studio, and the studio loved it and decided to do that first. And then at the end of 16 Candles, he asked me and Anthony Michael Hall to be in The Breakfast Club.
Right.
So in terms of, did I know that I was a muse? He told me that story, but when you're that age, I had nothing really to compare it to. I hadn't done, I'd done more movies actually than John had at that point.
Oh my, are you really?
Yeah, because 16 Candles was his directorial debut. He wrote Mr. Mom, he wrote Vacation, but he didn't direct those movies. So I had done a few movies. I did Tempest, I did, The Great Space Hunter Adventures in the Forbidden Zone in 3D. And then I did a couple of other things. So, I had actually had more experience, but I was still only 15 years old. So I didn't have a lot of life experience. And so I didn't have a lot to, it didn't seem that strange to me. Mm-hmm. I mean, now it does.
Right. Like strange, still complimentary, or strange, weird, creepy in any way?
It's peculiar.
Yeah.
It's complimentary. I mean, it always felt incredibly complimentary. But yeah, looking back on it, there was something a little peculiar.
It's interesting to become, I found for me in my experiences, to sort of reach an age that other people were at when they were doing certain things, and you just think, in a million fucking years, I would never I wouldn't want to have a relationship with a 24-year-old or 22-year-old, or, it's sort of that idea of writing something. And you think about the things that are in 16 Candles, and when you look at it as an adult through the prism of someone staring at your photo. And so, I mean, look, I know he's such an important person in your life. And so,
but
I don't
it's
want to disparage.
It's definitely complex, and I'm all and it's something that I turn over in my head a lot, and try to figure out how that all affected me, and I feel like I'm still processing all of that, and I probably will until the day I die.
Knowing we were chatting, I was thinking about when we met and how it had actually only been a year since I had become a public person. And my experience had been so weird of going to bed one night with only a few thousand people ever having met me or knowing me, and then waking up and it's, I'm all of a sudden a public person.
Yeah.
And so this entry into public life was really different than most people's, but you were so young.
Yeah.
And so I just, when did you realize you were famous? And did you? And what did that mean to you? And did you know of other famous people and then connected that you were one of them? Or did you,
I think that I have had sort of varying degrees of fame my entire life, because I've been a performer since I was 3. I mean, literally, since I was 3 years old, I was on stage with my father, singing with my father, and then also acting. My first play was The Grass Harp, which was written by Truman Capote, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I didn't have any lines. I just toddled on stage. When you do community theater, when you perform on stage, you sort of become like a celebrity. So I was a celebrity in my small town, in a way. I was sort of, I was known as the world's youngest jazz singer, that was what they wrote about. So I was written about, and, it was a sort of fame, a degree of fame, and then it was sort of like everything that I did, I sort of became like a little bit more well-known. You moved to Los Angeles, and then of course nobody knew who I was until I started to do stuff. But I feel like I've never known a world where I haven't been a little famous.
Yeah. Or a fucking lot famous. You're iconic.
At a certain point, then I became really, really famous. I feel like when you're on the cover of Time magazine, that sort of, which we both have been.
Yes, I concur.
Yeah, I think when it gets to that point, then you sort of, then it becomes like a level of fame that I personally don't feel that comfortable with. Even though I was happy with the movies I was doing, and I was, I loved the work of actually doing it, but all the fame and the notoriety, outside of that, I found it really overwhelming and scary. And it changed me a bit. It made me a very, maybe I would have been maybe this is just who I am, but there was a part of it that I felt like I became very closed and very self-protective in a way that I think a lot of people sort of misinterpreted for, people thought that I was, aloof or stuck up or, and it wasn't. It was fear and being very self-protective.
How, like, roughly how old were you?
I mean, I
when
think
you're talking about that.
This was, I think, when I was a teenager, when I started to make the John Hughes movies.
Wow. Was there one, like, an incident or a moment that you sort of felt, oh, I now feel that fear?
Yeah. I was, chased by the paparazzi, and they trapped me in a revolving door.
Oh my gosh.
In a hotel, and the flashes kept going on, and you know how disorienting flashes are. But then I was also in a revolving door that just kept turning, and that was terrifying for me. And still to this day, when I go to a red carpet event or anything, and there's the flash, my heart starts to race, and I get I get scared. And I don't. And I've done it enough now, and nothing, touch wood, but nothing bad's going to happen. It's just people taking my picture. But yeah, there's something really frightening there for me at that age, because I was still like a baby.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and also it's always been interesting to me from my experiences of thinking about, like, that we say taking a picture, and because people are taking something from you.
Yeah.
And a lot of times with paparazzi, it's without your consent.
Yeah.
So that you're somehow a free commodity for people because you become a public person.
Yeah.
I can't believe actually that you were 3. You've just you've known performance. I mean, we all know performance as kids, right? That's how we get attention from our parents.
Every exactly. You do this funny, cute, adorable thing, and your parents applaud you, and every kid does that, which is why I think so many kids are just natural actors.
Right. Yeah.
The tricky thing is holding on to that, if you continue acting, being able to hold on to that sort of childlike joy of performing for your parents, and still be able to not feel ridiculous or self-conscious, or because that was really hard for me as I got older. That I thought there was a moment where I thought, is this just ridiculous what I do? Is it like ridiculous? Is this shameful, just because I feel like there is something about, acting that's always an actor's, and I'm speaking for myself here, just like, oh, please love me. Please love me, mommy. Mom and daddy.
You don't have to be
adorable.
an actor to feel that way.
Yeah, but actors especially, this is what we do. We're like, I'm great. Look at me. But I just sort of have to face the fact that is that's a big part of who I am, is, acting, performing, eliciting a response from people, and hopefully making people feel a connection.
With that, you definitely do. You do.
Thank you.
I mean, like your entire career, always every performance.
Yeah.
Every performance. So on stage too. I've seen you on stage many times. So
you were one of the first people who came to one of my jazz gigs.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Back when I think it was somewhere in Malibu. It was really far in Malibu.
Oh, I remember.
And it was like one of my first gigs that I did with my jazz band.
Yep.
And I remember I was trying to get pregnant with my twins. And so I was like injecting myself in the back.
Oh my gosh.
With like hormone, medication. And I thought, well, it is kind of jazzy because I am like shooting up in a bathroom, but it's like, it's a hormone to help me get pregnant.
But yeah, there's a good movie in there somewhere with that sort of metaphor. But
yeah, you were like the only person who made the trek out there to see me. And I was so grateful.
Oh my God, you were amazing. For anybody listening who hasn't heard Molly sing, she has an extraordinary voice. When you were saying before about having felt a little afraid and kind of maybe closing yourself off a bit. Did you feel in some ways that were you trying to hold on to who you thought you were? Did you feel defined by how you were known in the press? Like, was there a separation there for you?
Yeah, I feel like it wasn't so much that I was trying to hold on to who I was. I was like becoming who I didn't even know who I was at that point. And I think it's really, really hard to figure that stuff out in public. It's really hard to go through that in the public eye and because we're all supposed to make mistakes. Growing up is about making mistakes and learning from them and saying, oh, I thought maybe this was who I was, but that's not who I am. This is who I am. Figuring that out, and everybody goes through that. But to go through it in public is, it's a difficult thing. I mean, it's why I moved to Paris. I didn't realize it at the time. But there was something in me that just said, I have to get out and get away from everything to sort of, figure out who I am and what I want out of life. And, do I want to act? Do I want to continue acting who I wanted to be? And it was possible for me to do that in Paris because at that time I wasn't really well known because those movies, well, now they have reached a cult status there as well. But at the time in the 90s, but they weren't. So I was able to sort of live a somewhat anonymous life there.
Was that refreshing or did it feel scary in some ways?
Both. I mean, it was refreshing. It was like I could breathe, I could walk around and I felt like I had my breathing had become very shallow because I was so, like what's going to happen and, how am I going to, hold on to the, once you become really famous, there's this thing that you're supposed to you're supposed to stay in the same place and you're supposed to hold on to that fame, and it's like, I didn't know anything about that except for the fact that it felt like a lot of pressure. And it felt like if my movie didn't succeed at the box office or if whatever, that I was letting a lot of people down.
Oh.
And that's a lot. That's a lot for a young person, I think.
Yeah. Like you're letting your family down?
Yeah. Letting my family down, letting people down, who believed in me, who said that I was, blah, 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 or whatever, Yeah. Like that I was just letting people down.
Thanks so much to Audible, our presenting sponsor. This year, why not let Audible expand your life by listening? Explore over 1 million audiobooks, podcasts, and exclusive Audible originals that'll inspire and motivate you. Just open the app and tap into your well-being with advice and insight from leading influencers, experts, and professionals. You'll find titles that enrich your life, relax you, and the ones I like best, titles that make you laugh. Whatever your focus or interest, there's a listen for it on Audible. Ultimately, it's all about starting good habits. Making a positive change is the best goal you can make for yourself, and Audible can help. There's so much opportunity and more to imagine when you listen. Let Audible help you reach the goals you set for yourself. Start listening today when you sign up for a free 30-day trial at audible.com/reclaiming. Thanks so much to our sponsor, Reformation. I want to take a second to talk about one of my favorite clothing brands, Reformation. You've probably seen Reformation on Instagram or at a wedding. They make the best guesting dresses. But if you're like me, you may have thought that's all they do. Well, you're in for a pleasant surprise. Last year, they worked with yours truly and Vote.org on a campaign to empower voters to take part in the democratic process and show off their workwear. From doing the campaign and getting to know the brand even better, I love their sweaters, blouses, workwear, shoes, and bags. But most important, I love how confident I feel in their stuff. Plus, it really holds up since they make everything with super high-quality, sustainable materials. Reformation is also a brand that uses their growing platform to do good in the world, and especially in the sustainable fashion space. As they say, being naked is the #1 most sustainable option. Reformation is #2. If you're looking for clothes you want to feel great in and feel better about, head to reformation.com. You told this incredible story when, and it was interesting because I listened to it at the time and then listened to it again. That you did this interview with Ira Ira Glass for This American Life, and you were talking about this with your mom, like this. I don't know if you feel like talking about it.
I'll talk about that. My mom always said that I was special. Yeah. She, my mom had lost her firstborn, who was my first brother, and my sister at the time was only 6 months old, and my mom had a complete breakdown, basically, and she's open about it. She was suicidal. I mean, didn't try anything, but in her mind, she thought, if I die by suicide, I'll be able to be with Robbie again. And then she had this experience that, and my mom. My mom is like a very grounded person, not at all new agey at all. This is but an experience that she had, and looking back on it, my more I don't want to say cynical, but my analytical mind thinks, well, she was having a complete breakdown, and she was the one that was talking to herself, and but my mom absolutely to this day says no. It was I was visited by a spirit who told her why she was still supposed to be there, and apparently the reason was me. And that's a story that she told me from the time that I was very, very small. And the funny thing is a little PS to this whole story, is apparently my sister said that she said it to her.
Oh my gosh. Really? Do you think that's true, or do you think your sister heard your mom saying it and maybe she wanted it to be true?
Maybe.
I mean,
that's
what do you think that was? Gosh, that would be,
I don't know. I haven't asked my brother if my mom had another child after my sister, my brother, and then I was the last one. I don't know. My mom, so you know how it is when you there's like a story that you've heard like your whole life, and then all of a sudden it's like your brother that happened to instead of you, and you're like, well, hang on, no, but I don't know. Memory's a funny thing.
Very, very funny. Memory and truth, right? Yeah. They're two so subjective.
Yeah.
What did it feel like for you to sort of just always be told you're special? Did you ever have an experience then that you were confronted where you felt, oh, maybe that's not true, like in some way? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot. I feel like that I lived for so long with this fear of disappointing. Like I said, disappointing. I think first my primal relationship, which is my parents, but then there was that disappointing whoever, like my agent or my manager, my or fans or people. I was just always very, I was very hard on myself in that way. And, and the fact of the matter is I did feel like I disappointed them, but it didn't matter.
This was when you went to Paris. So in this
or like
phase,
when, like when my career didn't stay, at this like zenith of like white hotness or whatever. I feel like that was maybe a disappointment to my parents, but I feel like it was more like they were, like whenever you're having kids now, like if they don't get something that they want, or they don't do as well in a test, or they whatever, those like disappointments that they have in life, it doesn't mean that I believe in them any less. I might be disappointed for them, but but I love them, and I feel like they're going to do extraordinary things because I think they're extraordinary. And I feel like that's the way that my parents were as well. I never felt like, particularly with my father, I felt like that, well, both of them, I think. But I had a special relationship with my father, and my father passed away a couple years ago.
Yeah.
But I feel like, he was just like my biggest fan. And people say that all the time. They come up and they say like, "Oh, I'm your biggest fan." Like I actually did have my biggest fan, and it was my dad.
It's pretty special.
Yeah,
it's pretty incredible.
It is. It is really special. But it's like, of course, it's like it's hard when you lose that.
I haven't gone through that yet.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, it comes for all of us, and it's something that we all go through, which is kind of like, I think one of the reasons why I'm open and I talk about that, because I feel like grief is like, it's a hard thing for people. And it's happening all the time to everyone everywhere. Sometimes it happens in a more brutal way than the way that it happened to me. But, we all lose people that we love, and we all figure out a way through it. We have to. That's just, part of life. But I know that anybody that's listening right now is struggling. Either they've gone through it or they know that it's coming. Yeah. But it's really hard. And I think the only way through it is to, I believe, to talk about it and to be there for each other.
Yeah. I mean, it's grief in general. Anderson Cooper has a great, podcast on this.
Yeah.
And so, but I think that there's such a big, wide spectrum of grief, and it feels like that's on one of the close to the top of the list of those things that you wish they taught us when we were younger. Like I saw this thing on Insta the other day about parallelograms, and it was like, yeah, I would have rather have learned about grief, how to move through grief, than a fucking parallelogram. So, that never became a thing for the rest of my life. So I had an experience I think it was actually in 2016, and I had gone back on medication at that point, and I'd gone, and my therapist is a trauma psychiatrist. I'd gone in, and I was like, "Oh, I think I'm depressed, and maybe we need to up my meds," and blah blah blah, and talking, and she was like, "No, this is just grief," And so I think we don't even learn how to identify that, in that way, and I find I've gotten a little better with it. I know a lot of grief that I have still carry and move through are sort of around just not just the things that happened, but also what I lost in connection to that, right? The kinds of things that I didn't experience or go through. And I imagine, even though there was a lot more positive things for you, that there were aspects of young adulthood or adolescence that you just didn't get to experience. And did that feel like a loss for you, or just something you didn't know it, so it?
I think it was, it's all I know. And I think that I've had a pretty extraordinary life. So I try to stay focused on the gratitude of that instead of mourning something that was lost that I can't really get back. I grew up in an unconventional way, and like you said, there were so many great things about it. If I ever think about things that I've lost, or things that I wish I would have done differently, I try not to have regrets. But I try to just acknowledge that, particularly when I talk to my kids, because sometimes if I have expectations, or if if I'm really like gung ho about them going to college, it's because I didn't, and I wish that I had, because I think I really would have liked it.
I think you would have loved it.
I think I would have actually thrived. I wasn't a very good high school student, but I think I would love college. I mean, I'm not ruling it out.
Right.
One day,
I was
once
say,
I'll be the oldest student, but it's something that I would really like to do. And I've talked to people and they've said, "Oh, well, you could teach a class." And I I don't want to teach a class. Right. I want to learn. I'm just so, I'm just eternally thirsty for knowledge. So anyway, I think, to get back to that, I would rather sort of look at that and sort of acknowledge that, so that it tells me something about what it is that I want and how I want the rest of my life to unfold.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I'm like now back thinking about college and how, because I went to graduate school late. So
That's right.
So I was in my early 30s and much older than a lot of the other kids. And I so appreciated being spoon-fed knowledge, to have somebody hand you an outline for a lecture and to be given this and to just have your mind blown and constantly, thinking of new things and putting things together. It's such a gift that we don't appreciate at 18.
At all. I really do feel like, that people should have a little bit of real world experience so that they can really appreciate this incredible gift of education.
Well, a gap year like they do in Europe, you know, so it's or several gap years, but it's I think
Did you feel self-conscious being an older student?
I think I felt more self-conscious about being Monica Lewinsky than being an older student. It was a little harder. And I think it was.
But you kind of got over it. I kind of felt. Yeah. Well, I'm not going to speak for you, but did you feel like you were maybe self-conscious at first, but then once you got into it, that kind of went away, or did you just feel self-conscious all the time?
I think in terms of being older, that went away. So I think once I made friends, and I've always been a big believer of you just need one friend, one person to have lunch with, one person to go to the movies with. Yeah. And I had, I made several friends that I'm still close to today. But graduate school was really interesting for me because it sort of became the mirror of my trauma. So it was all of the things that I hadn't totally understood had damaged me came to the surface. So I hadn't realized the impact of having been called stupid for such a long time. So I couldn't get up and give a presentation in class. Ooh. I was, and my imposter syndrome around, I was afraid to go, when we had to write essays and do dissertation, which I'd never done a dissertation or thesis, whatever it was. I was too worried about going to ask for help because I was anxious that what I needed help with, everybody else knew. And then they would go, right. Oh, you don't really belong here. Yeah. So there was that.
But you got through it.
I did.
And you got skills that you use today, don't you?
Well, yeah, I think, I read Rashida Jones said this once somewhere, and it was so perfect that I've stolen it, that a master's degree gives you a new lens. And so that is completely, it really reoriented how I looked at myself, my own story, but also what happened to me in the world because I was studying social psychology. Yeah. So, but go back to school.
I'm.
You can take one. You can take one. I don't know how many classes you have to take a thing to be matriculated, but
yeah, I don't know. I have to figure that out. My kids, my 15-year-olds are already looking at colleges, and Matilda is in college. So I kind of have sort of poked my, like I look at who the professors are and what are the classes I would like to take. I don't know. It might be something that I'll do one day.
And I don't know, maybe your time in Paris was like this, but for me, it was like fumbling. I was just fumbling, trying to move forward and didn't really know how to do that, which way to go, where to go. And so, okay, well, this isn't working. So what's the opposite of this? Okay, I'll try that.
Right.
And that doesn't work. And you're, kind of so.
Yeah. Does that ever go away though? I mean, that I totally relate to that, but I feel like maybe I've had like moments where I was, I have moments, I have experiences, but I don't think that feeling of like fumbling through life ever really goes away. At least it hasn't for me.
Yeah, but I think there are moments.
If I feel like if one is searching and if one is not complacent, and is searching, then you're always fumbling.
Did you write, were you writing all along and it was just sort of one of those things where you eventually felt ready to let people read your writing? Or did you sort of start to discover that you were a writer?
Oh, I've always been a writer. I mean, that was, I would say there were three main things that I was really interested and focused on as a kid, and that was acting, singing, and writing. I also danced, but dancing, ballet, and I wasn't as obsessed with that as I was with the acting and singing and writing, and I think it's because I've just always been obsessed with people and why we do what we do. Like,
do you have an answer?
I'm still finding out, but I feel like that's what makes me want to write or take on other people or personas, because of this desire I have to understand humankind. It's just my obsession. And I don't know that that's ever going to go away.
That's so interesting. I've never thought about the connection of, obviously actors inhabit other people and personas, but I haven't ever really thought about it or heard maybe of that interest coming from sort of trying to understand the human condition better.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
I mean, it sounds lofty when I hear it back to me.
Oh, sorry. I think it's really interesting.
I mean, human condition. Yeah. What makes us human? What makes us make the same mistakes over? Like, what makes us betray each other? What makes us betray ourselves? I was just reading a memoir of a galley of Ione skies, and it was really interesting because we've had these lives that have sort of like that were happening at the same time. And we were both actors and we both, dated the same people. I dated Adam Horovitz, she married him and, but she writes very honestly and openly about, in her case, infidelity, and being unfaithful to somebody that she deeply, deeply loved, and and then compartmentalizing, and I had so much respect for her writing about it, and it's very painful for her because she lost. She's okay. She's married to somebody that's great, Ben Lee. But like, why do we do that? Why, and we all do. Like everybody.
Yeah.
It's just part of the human condition, but it's something that I want to understand. And not just that, there's so many things that we do that I want to understand. And I think that's why I'm drawn to writing and to acting, to be able to inhabit a character, just really be inside of a character, you get to, in a way, feel what that character is feeling. Mm-hmm. And it's impossible to not understand if you felt it. Mm-hmm. It's weird. I've never really talked about it in that way.
One thing I wanted to go back to, because you were mentioning it before, and this is in connection to John and the sort of early years. You wrote this extraordinary piece in the New Yorker in 2018 about exactly like what you were saying before about recontextualizing, I think, for today's world, like what these films meant. And so just, I don't know, can you like sum up the article or just, what it,
Well, I wrote this piece because I'm still figuring out, I'm still really interested in my own feelings about it. And it became very apparent to me when I had my own kids, and I wanted to show them, my work, and and then when that happened, you can't help but see everything from a different angle.
When that happened, being showing your kids or Me Too?
Well, I guess both, because
Okay.
I wrote two. Well, I've written a few pieces for the New Yorker now,
Right.
but the first one I wrote was right after, I think right when the second wave of Me Too happened.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I say the second because
because Tirana started it
exactly
10 years prior.
Exactly.
And exactly 100%.
So my first piece that I wrote was All the Other Harveys, because everything was so focused on Harvey Weinstein, and I wanted to say, no, it's not just Harvey Weinstein. It's a lot of people in a lot of different businesses. But it was the first time that I had spoken a little bit about my own experiences, as being a young actress growing up in Hollywood. The second piece that I wrote was about looking at The Breakfast Club and those movies that I did with John Hughes, through the Me Too lens. Mm-hmm. And it was really a hard article to write, because I wouldn't have the career that I have if it weren't for those movies, and I feel like I have a lot of privilege, being in those, and I don't want to come across as poor me. I'm very cognizant of the fact that people have much more challenging, dealing with much bigger issues than me, but it's still, it's still a lot to grapple with. Mm-hmm. And I also really wanted to be very careful and I didn't want it to be seen as condemning them at all, because I feel like those movies still mean a lot to people, and they still have so many redeeming qualities, and the overarching message, I think, is something that's very positive for kids to watch.
Do you think they reflected the culture more or shaped the culture more?
I think that they reflected John Hughes's experience in a very white, almost segregated part of Chicago. Mm-hmm. I say kind of segregated because it wasn't officially segregated, but I mean, let's face it, our life, I grew up looking back on it in a very segregated way. Mm-hmm. I mean, in the elementary school that I went to in Sacramento, 2 people of color that were in that grade, and I remember it because I was looking, because the music that I sang with my father was jazz music, right, and all of the great jazz performers and singers were Black. Mm-hmm. And so, but I didn't see that reflected in my school, mm-hmm. and this was like growing up in the 70s.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I feel like John's experience was, that was really his experience, and he grew up in a not very diverse not very racially diverse. And yet people have told me, a lot of Black people, a lot of, my friend Ruben Toledo, who is from Cuba, so many people have told me how much they relate to this experience of watching The Breakfast Club, that to them it was, so I guess we're all avatars,
Well, I think, that's in some ways, right? That's the gift of emotional truth, right? Is so like, yes, it's important to see yourself in different ways, right? So whether it's your skin color or your body type or your nationality or, all those things, right? But I think that probably there was so much emotional truth in those films that like you can't help but find yourself in there somewhere, So,
I think so. Although, nobody's going to remake The Breakfast Club because they legally can't. It's like, J.D. Salinger, nobody can make Catcher in the Rye. I think that's going to be the case with The Breakfast Club. But even so, I feel like you couldn't make that movie now.
Yeah.
Because it really does not represent America. It would have to be more,
right,
diverse, racially diverse, I think.
Yeah. But wait, do you feel like you couldn't tell that story?
You could tell the story, but it would be a different story.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
That would be something that I would be more interested to watch anyway than somebody just remaking,
right,
The Breakfast Club as it was. I feel like it would be much more interesting to see a Breakfast Club like movie that represents today. I want to ask you just, I don't know if it's finished yet, but you produced the Amanda Knox.
I'm EPing, we're in the process of shooting. So I'm EPing the Amanda Knox limited dramatic series for Hulu. So
very exciting.
Yeah. It's another story of a young woman who becomes public property, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that, we've seen over the years, especially as we look back now, even when it's positive attention, like what you had, there is a price to pay to be owned by the world when you're very young.
Yeah. I feel like it was a little, when people ask me what it was like, that whole experience really felt like being swept up in a wave. That's
in a good wave or a bad wave? Like, because I'd be afraid to be swept up in a wave.
Well, and sometimes, I love the water, and there's sometimes when you're like riding a wave and it just feels like, wow, it feels great. But then, like, if you move the wrong way, suddenly you're like upside down and you have like water in your nose and in your throat, and you like think, am I going to die? And I can't breathe, and this is humiliating because when I stand up, my whole ass is going to be covered with sand, and like,
I know that whole thing.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah,
no, it's it's great, and it's like, and then in a second, it's not great, But then you right yourself, and then it can be great again.
Yeah. Did you talk about did you have a Harvey experience?
Did I have a Harvey experience
with him or?
Well, I've had many Harvey experiences with different people at a young age, and I'm still processing. I've processed it in a private way, and eventually I'm going to be able to talk about it and write about it. But I'm still grappling.
Yeah. I think this complicated thing happens in society and with change, where a big cultural change happens. And it somehow feels like it's a switch that went, like it was off and now it's on. And now everything is binary about, is it from the off or the on, or the before or the after, or the yes or the no.
Yeah.
And it's and one of the things I appreciate about your writing is the nuance. And I think, and that's what I hear you saying now, of like trying to unpack these, experiences. And I went through the same thing, I think, like with my own, of just kind of first feeling, and I know you said a similar sentiment in your piece too, of like, am I the voice that, like, there are a lot of other voices that should maybe be heard in this subject area? That's how I felt for myself. But I think that way of just trying to think, okay, how do you reprocess, but also allow yourself space to go, yes, it was that, but no, it wasn't that.
Yeah.
And also, I think I was very, and have always been mindful of, gosh, I don't want to be getting on some bus that everybody's getting on, and like it's always been really important to me to sort of differentiate there was abuse of power, but it was not sexual assault.
Yeah.
My experiences from 98.
Yeah, it's very hard to, like you said, to feel like you're supposed to take a stand.
Mm-hmm.
And that, you're supposed to take a stand, and it's supposed to be very clear, black or white. And nothing is, for me at least, that, there's been nuance, and it's hard for people to understand that. I think it's hard for all of us to understand that. We all want answers. I think that's why, one of the reasons why true crime is such so fascinating for people, is because they get to the end, and then, and then they find out who did it, and everyone can go to bed because they caught the bad guy until the next day, and then they have to do it again. We want answers. We want everything to be very clear, and unfortunately, I feel like, it's not always. There is nuance, and I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the older I get, the more interested I am at looking through all these different lenses.
Me too.
And to understanding the good and the bad. And, I definitely believe that we all have a shadow side. And we also are able to radiate light, and I'm okay with that.
You have a lot of wisdom, Molly.
I don't know.
I always come away from our conversations and feel sort of renewed, and like I've thought about something in a different way. And I've always been so impressed by how you've, especially over the years, like you've become an unpacker, like a real unpacker of looking at things and reevaluating. And I've heard you talk about things in ways that are so like emotionally and spiritually impressive, if that makes sense. So
thank you. That's really nice to hear.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, we've known each other for a really long time.
Yeah, we've been there, I think, witnessed some very hard things in our lives. And I mean, it's been like an absolute joy to see you become, this incredible, I mean, I always knew that that's who you were, and I always believed that, but like to see you, I mean, there were moments where, I'm just going to say it, you can always cut it out, but I remember you coming to see a play that I was doing, and we were in the restaurant together. It was just you and me. I remember that you had gone somewhere for solace, and then you were in. And just how like hard and hurtful it was.
It was very
I mean, I'm crying, but it happened to you. It was, but it's hard when you see like
so I mean, just like, I think, to explain, right, that I had gone to temple, I think it was Yom Kippur, I'd gone to temple with some of my relatives here in New York, and I wasn't a member of the congregation, and so the rabbi had used me as a negative example of something in his speech. And it's interesting because I feel myself now, because I remember the moment of I just shut down. Like I become so used to being publicly shamed in different ways. And so I think that it was jarring because it was an unexpected place. I just feel it's like a cement wall just sort of comes down like a gate, So you're so sweet.
It was really hard and made me so mad. Like I wanted to go and find him and, but this just happened. So, this, all the time, I would, hear that. So anyway, as your friend, it's just been really lovely to watch you reclaim your narrative and, in such a beautiful, dignified way. I don't know that I've had the opportunity to really tell you that. And, it's just been really nice.
So I like to ask everybody at the end if there is anything that you are working on reclaiming right now, and it doesn't have to necessarily be an emotional thing. It could be anything that you have lost or had stolen that you're trying to get back. So it could be a memory or an object or an experience.
I think like everything else, to me, everything is a process. To me, I feel like I want to reclaim that feeling of being able to do it. And I feel like that is something, that feeling that you have when you're little and before anybody tells you that you can't. Mm-hmm. As an adult. And I feel like I'm aware of the fact that even if you sort of get it, you could also lose it the next day. So that's why to me it's a process. It's a process of reclaiming every day. And I find it. Every time I write that book, I used to tell myself I couldn't write or I could never publish what I write because I'm an actor and nobody would accept an actor, writing, and how dare I, I didn't think things like that when I first started to write, because nobody had, I didn't care. I don't know. I just, that belief in myself. So it's something that I have to trick myself back into every day. And I think that's a form of reclaiming, of reclamation that just I do every day. So it's that process.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. This has been great.
Yeah, really good.